Hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Exceptional Scrum Master podcast. My name is Yinka, and I remain your online Agile coach. Now, in today's episode, I'm going to be sharing tips on how to facilitate the sprint planning event or the sprint planning meeting. Now, this is the meeting that initiates the entire sprint. So if you're supporting a Scrum team, the sprint planning event is the first meeting that kicks off a new sprint. Now, what do we do in this event? This is where we lay out the work that will be performed in the current sprint. Now, as an Agile team or as a Scrum team, we would have decided, the cadence of our sprint. Are we running 1 week sprints? Are we running 2 week sprint, 3 week sprint, or 4 week sprints? Now, 4 weeks is the maximum that an Agile team should have as a cadence. So depending on the cadence of your team, you guys are going to use the sprint planning meeting to plan out the work that will be implemented in that sprint. Now, for the purpose of this video, we're going to be assuming that we're running 2 week sprint because that is the most popular sprint cadence out there. And it's not just popular for the sake of it being popular. It's actually popular because 2 weeks is such a perfect time. It's not too short. It's not too long for us to be able to manage our risk and make good progress. So that's why many teams support the 2 week cadence. So assuming that we're using a 2 week cadence, we're going to have to plan the work that's going to be done over the next 2 weeks. Now, in this meeting, everybody has got to be available. So you need to have your PO, and definitely you need to have the team members. And other times, if there's some experts that we need, depending on the work that we're trying to build in this sprint, we might need to call on some experts to join us at the sprint planning session. So the product owner is going to ensure that everyone that attends this meeting is ready to discuss the important items and how they're going to map out to the product goal. Now, remember that we have an overall objective we're trying to achieve. And in an Agile way of working, what we do is we break down that big chunk of work into smaller chunks so that we're able to implement those and create increment sprint after sprint. So during the sprint planning session, we're going to be looking at the product goal. What are we working towards now? What is the next most important thing that we can work on over the next 2 weeks so that we can showcase that value to our stakeholders, get feedback on them, and continue to build on the product? So during this meeting, you need to have your product owner present because this is the individual who is going to tell us what we need to build. So what important items are we going to be working on? What is our goal for the next 2 weeks? What are we building? So in a sprint planning session, there are 3 key topics that must be covered. The first one is, why is the sprint valuable? The second one is, what can be done this sprint? And 3, how will the chosen work get done? Now, for the first question, you're really going to evaluate, why is the sprint valuable? And the product owner is going to propose, how the priority is going to increase the value on what we're working on. And that will give the opportunity for the entire team to look at that priority and look at what we can do to ensure that we achieve that objective. Now, you're going to see all the team members deliberating on what the product owner has selected as the next priority. And together, the team is going to craft out what their sprint goal would be. So based on what the next priority is, we then craft our sprint goal and say, hey, this is going to be our next focus, and this is what we're going to work towards as a team. Now, based on that goal, as a team, we then decide what can get done this sprint. There are often times that a product owner may have a priority that is too big for the current sprint. Remember that we have a cadence. Now, in this instance, we're working in 2 weeks interval. That means every 2 weeks, we start and stop. And so regardless of what the product owner has as this priority, as a team, we need to figure out if it's possible for us to even get that done. So this is the time where we start exploring the complexity of the work, the size of the work, have we explored every dependency possible? And it's in this time that you actually appreciate the beauty of a backlog refinement. Because if we've had a backlog refinement session, then this session actually is much easier because we would have had the opportunity to explore those questions, would have answered those questions. And this will not be the first time that we will be coming across, such priorities or such questions, at all. Because that product owner would have shared a list of priorities in the backlog refinement. And backlog refinement should actually even be refined based on priority. So as a team, when we come to the sprint planning session, we're already familiar with the product backlog items. We're familiar with the roadmap. We're familiar with the milestones. We know exactly what we're working on. So this is not the first time we're coming across it. But then we're coming across as a team to determine if the priority can be accomplished this sprint. Now, if we determine that we can accomplish this priority this sprint, then the third question will then be, how will the chosen work get done? Now, this is when the team starts either maybe breaking down that story into smaller chunks of work so that they can get it done in a couple of days or a day or two. And then that way they're able to see, oh, is there any dependency we didn't consider? Or just trying to just break down into smaller chunks where it becomes easier for them to implement. So now those are the 3 areas that you want to consider as a Scrum Master in a sprint planning session. What are we trying to get done? The product owner is going to help with that objective. Then together as a team, we're going to come up with that goal. The second question will be, what can be done this sprint? And once the team determines what can be done this sprint based on the sprint goal, the third question then becomes, how will that chosen work get done? Now, this is what forms the foundation of a sprint planning session. So now the next thing I like to do will be to kind of walk you through an agenda so that you know exactly what to do and when to do those things. So let's assume that we selected an hour for our sprint planning session. What is the first thing that needs to get done in a sprint planning session? Remember that the sprint planning session is the first meeting that kicks off a sprint. So definitely one thing you want to do is to ensure that the previous sprint is closed out. So with the team, whether it's the product owner or a member of the team, we want to ensure that we close out our last sprint. So where all the stories completed, is there any story that's going to roll over? We just don't roll over stories. We need to ensure that this story is still important based on the next goal, and the product owner will help us determine that. And then we will know whether we're going to roll that over to the next sprint or we're just going to move it back into the backlog. So you want to ensure that the previous sprint is closed out. Now, once the previous sprint is closed up, the next thing you want to do is to establish the team capacity. Now, who is available to work this sprint, right? You want to determine whether is there any holiday we need to put into consideration? Is there anybody that is taking any type of vacation, so that we establish the capacity? Now, it's important that we establish the capacity early on in this meeting, so that by the time the product owner is discussing the goal and then we're trying to determine what can be done this sprint, we are picking that considering the fact that we know what the capacity for this sprint is, because we want to ensure that whatever we commit to is what we get completed. That is a metric that we measure. So we want to ensure that we have sufficient capacity for the work that is about to get done. So it's very important that early on, once we close out the previous sprint, we quickly establish what our capacity is for this current sprint. Now, capacity is slightly different from velocity. Velocity is the speed in which the team moves on a regular basis. So on a sprint by sprint basis, we have a velocity which depicts the speed at which we move. Now, capacity is slightly different. Now, from the velocity, who is available to do the work? So capacity is more like a subset of velocity, where it's possible that I can run 5 miles an hour, but maybe if I have a broken leg today, I might not be able to run 5 miles an hour. So my capacity for today might be reduced to about 3 or 2, right? So it's very important that we just don't only stick to our velocity, but we always consider the capacity of the team when we want to kick off our sprints. Now, in other times, there might be a few stories that might need to be estimated. So let's assume that maybe during the week after we had a refinement session, maybe a few priorities changed and there are a few things that the product owner considers important. If we do not already have the stories, then it's important for us to then go ahead and create those stories in the sprint planning session. And obviously, we're going to need to have to estimate those stories, because before we kick off the sprint, we want to ensure that all of the stories have been estimated, because that will help us determine the capacity using our velocity as historical value. So it's important that all of our stories are estimated. So if you're working with a team that has a bad habit of not estimating stories, there is room for you to grow your team and ensure that you coach them into how to estimate stories, and they understand the benefit of estimating their work. Because at the end of the day, it benefits them, because that way they are more informed, knowing exactly what they can commit to and what they can complete at the end of the sprint. So now, once the capacity has been identified, then we go into what is the priority, and then we craft out our sprint goal, and then we go into what can be done. And then finally, we then break down, those stories into tasks if needed. Now, if your team does not find a need for each, you can't force them as a Scrum Master, but there's definitely advantage sometimes in breaking down, stories that are slightly big, maybe a 5-story point story, into smaller chunks. So that way you can churn out your task much faster, and then that can help you complete the task. Now, other times, even a story, another benefit of breaking those down into tasks is the fact that maybe multiple people can actually work on that story. And that way, one person can pull in one part of the task, another person can pull in that part of the task. And before you know it, we're done in probably about a day or two. So there's so many benefits to breaking out work. So that's something that you definitely want to coach your team on. But if you're against it, don't stress yourself. As long as they know that whatever they're committing to is something that they're confident in completing, then that is fine. But it's important for them at least to understand, how are we going to get this work completed? What architecture is needed? What tools do we need? And all that kind of stuff. Let them come up with that plan, even if they are not breaking that work into smaller chunks, because the plan that they come up with then becomes the sprint backlog that we then use on a daily basis to inspect our progress and see how we are moving towards completion of our sprint goal. So kicking off a sprint planning session is so much easy as long as you know the steps to take in the right direction. So now let's do a quick recap. The first thing we want to do is ensure that we close out the previous sprint, understand whether we completed the work or if there's any carryover work. We just don't carry over work. We want to ensure that whatever we're carrying over to the next sprint is important to the goal of that next sprint. We also want to establish the capacity. Do we have enough people to do the work? Once we establish that, then the product owner goes ahead to share what the next priority is. And together as a team, we will then craft out our sprint goal. And if there's any need for us to have an expert on that team or in that call, then we definitely want to invite them into that meeting. And then once we have a sprint goal, we then determine what can be done this sprint. And that's when we start looking at the backlog items that we have that we can pull to help us accomplish that goal. Now, if we don't have sufficient stories that will help us accomplish that goal, then that is the time for us to create extra stories, ensure the stories are estimated, and then those stories are pulled into the sprint. And then the final thing you want to consider is, what plan are we going to have? How are we going to get the work done? And that's when the development team comes together to establish how they're going to get that done. And then the outcome of that discussion is the sprint goal that we're going to have to work with on a daily basis. So I hope this video helps you understand how to run a sprint planning session and helps you improve how to run your session, and you're able to see the gaps that you possibly have so that you can help your team to become super effective. Thank you so much for spending this time with me until this very minute. Thank you so much. I love you so much. Thank you so much for all the love, all the support, all the likes, all the comments, all the reviews. I love you all so much. Thank you so much for being a loyal subscriber of my channel. Thank you so much. And I still want to remind you all that my coaching program that kicks off in a few weeks is still ongoing. So if you're interested, don't think about it too long. Ensure that you register. The deadline for registration is the end of this month, the 31st of May. So ensure that you register ASAP so you can sign up and be a part of the next set of people that are going to be transforming their lives. So if you need any information, click the link in the description of today's video and you'll get everything you need. And you can always send an email if you have any question regarding this coaching program. I wish you all the best as always, and I will catch you in my next episode. Bye for now.